I'd like you to take a moment and take a look at, I'm going to pull yours because mine just, take a look at the front of the bulletin. See, this is what it looks like. Take a look at the front of the bulletin. And remember, I was so proud of last night's service because they remembered that when I ask questions, I'm actually looking for answers, and they're usually not hard answers. So they joined in right away. What do you see when you look at the front of the bulletin? Star, sun, rainbow, a wheel, clouds, moon, cross. Yeah, there's kind of the cross and the sun. I like that. Lots of things in there. Somebody even yesterday said, I'm going to borrow it again. See, this way I know he won't fall asleep. That it looked a little bit like a baby carriage and collecting all of creation to carry it on. Isn't that neat? They look like pieces to me, like a flannel graph, or for those of you who are beyond paper, something where you could drag the images around and make a different picture. They look like they're ready to be put in a different order, look like they're ready to be colored or created in a different way. Now imagine different ways that they can be colored. Look at the lovely Acolyte coloring. Isn't that nice he did that? You never know what you have to do when you sit by Pastor Amy. But it works out. It works out because there's always candy that Pastor already supplies. Bright colors can give you one kind of a sense of the mood. Now imagine if they were soft pastels, like the Precious Moments pastels or some of those early Bibles where the pictures were all soft colors. But imagine if instead they were all dark colors, dark greens and dark blues and dark purples. The colors would change the mood and change how we would think about the image on the front. The picture invites us and encourages our imaginations, much like Scripture today. When we talk or when we think about the end times, we're encouraged to engage our imaginations because we don't completely or fully know what the end times will be like. Scripture talks about it, but still, it's hard to imagine. But our imaginations have been skewed a bit about the end times. They've been formed by things we have read, watched on TV or in movies, or even talked about. There are plenty of end time movies. I'm going to name a few things for you, and you tell me what kind of end time I am referring to. Duck and Cover. What kind of end time? You have to talk real loud. Nuclear war. Nuclear war. Duck and cover was the way that you were being taught to prepare to help save yourself. Usually was duck and cover underneath the desk. Did anybody practice that? There were a few people who did. Yep. I don't know if you know this, but those people who made all those promotional videos and told the schools to teach you how to do that knew full well that would make no difference in saving your life. They did it to help people feel empowered in a powerless situation. Kind of interesting, huh? I remember lots of made-for-TV movies about what would it be like if there was a nuclear war and how and who would live and survive. Venice. If you've caught the news this week, Venice is currently being flooded by unusually high sea levels and very high tides. More than just a fluke, and it's happening more often and they're wondering what's going to happen to this historic city. So what kind of end times is Venice an example of? Global warming. When we do not care for our creation and what God has given us, creation starts to wither in ways that really injure, hurt, and diminish those around us. As glaciers melt, as land that was called land but really had ice underneath melts, the oceans are rising, and Venice is an example of that. Last example. When someone says, time to call the family, to gather together around the bedside, what end time is this an example of? Death. The death of an individual who is coming to their own individual end time. When someone is dying, time stops for the caregivers. Their work, the car, the dishes, the laundry, the to-do list, the volunteer organizations, it all goes on hold to be with the person that we love so dearly. And for the individual, for the time that they have left, they want to spend it with loved ones. If that person is moved from their home, there are a few home comforts that are moved, but always pictures. Pictures of family and friends come with. Things that are from those family and friends come with. For the individual, they sometimes even begin to prioritize who they want to spend time with, turning away a few extra visitors, because rest and that time with just those precious few become such a cherished possession. It's a new order of things that happen. All the other stuff of life falls to the background. No matter what end time you talk about, no matter what creates that new order of things, we move things around and we decide what's important pretty quickly. Our image of the end times has been skewed, and fear comes when we think about those end times. Jesus says things in Scripture. Do not be afraid. Now, don't misunderstand me. There will be things that are painful in the end times. If the end times is an experience where a group of people all die at the same time, like through a natural disaster, a horrible accident, or the true end of the world, there will be pain and suffering. And when an individual dies, there is oftentimes pain and suffering. God knows that there'll be pain. He knows that we have fear of what is to come and that we fear the unknown. That is why Jesus says, do not be terrified. In this gospel, it's do not be terrified. Not just do not be afraid, which we hear over and over in other parts of Scripture, but do not be terrified. Jesus says that because he knows that fear and terror come when we have to face the end times. God addresses our fear, acknowledges our fear. Every single time he says, do not be afraid. When you go to share a meal or coffee or cookies like you'll do today after church, no one is running around in the narthex saying, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. If they kept doing that, don't be afraid, you'll start thinking, I am afraid of you. They don't say don't be afraid when there's nothing to be fearful of. I think sometimes when we hear God say, "Don't be afraid," we put a finger to his words, shaking at us, and somehow along the line, we maybe were even taught that fear was a sign of someone not being a strong enough Christian. Well, that's not what Jesus says. Not one place does "do not be afraid" follow with, "because if you were a good enough Christian, you wouldn't have fear." Nowhere does it say that. But if you're walking on a slippery dock, or when the winter comes and it's icy out in the parking lot and someone says, "Walk carefully, I don't want you to slip and fall," you become more attentive to the things around you, right? You're a little more careful. It's a way of someone saying, "I don't want you to be afraid, I want you to be prepared, and I care about you." So when you hear the words of Jesus saying, "Do not be afraid," it's not because there's no reason to be afraid. End times is not having cookies and coffee after church. It's because God sees the fear we have and knows we will be afraid and wants us to know that we need to be cautious and careful and look around. And he also wants you to know that he sees your own fears, whatever they may be. You may not name them as end times. You may instead say, "I'm not sure how I'm going to get everything done that I feel like I need to get done before I reach the end of my life. I'm not sure if I have enough funds to be able to stretch to do all the things that I need to do, and what if I get really sick?" God knows those fears. Or will my children still get together once I'm gone? Or will they show up since they don't show up at the same time now because they don't get along? Do not be afraid. Do not be terrified, Jesus says, because he knows what the end times brings for us. When I took a seminary class on the book of Revelation, I was quite frankly surprised and astonished by the excitement of the professor. He loved the book of Revelation, and he loved God. He walked us through the whole book of Revelation, and he would teach us, and then in the middle of teaching, he would break out in song. And because there was songs that we knew, hymns we had heard and grown up with, and because they had such catchy tunes, well, some people who never grew up Lutheran don't think we have catchy tunes. I think it's something you kind of get used to. But because we knew those songs so well, we would all join him in singing. Now, these weren't the dark, dreary hymns that sometimes are tucked in our hymnals. These were lively songs. And it wasn't because he was trying to keep us awake. It's because the words of those songs were the exact words that were written in the text that we had read and studied that day. Song after song about praise and God and joyfulness. I think sometimes we only hear the dark, dreary side. It surprised me, and it gave me a different perspective about end times. The songs that we have been singing already today and will continue to sing have a whole lot to say about end times. Their words are very powerful, but they're not dark and dreary. Let me share a story with you. A woman sat by the bedside of her mother. Her mother had battled cancer. The fluids had built up in her body. They had to be drained because the fluids would fill up so much that her lungs had no space to be able to breathe in air, and she'd feel like she was suffocating. Now, that draining process was extremely painful, but necessary for her to breathe. She had no reserves left between her skin and her bones. You could see the veins, and you could see each bone on her body. It was the very end of the first day when she had become mostly silent in bed. She was still whispering a few things every once in a while and nodding a bit. The night had come. The rest of the family had gone home to sleep. It's hard to know how long these vigils will last. So it was just this woman and her mother sitting by. The woman pulled out a hymnal and began to sing some songs, flipping through the pages to find one she could sing without an organ or piano to lead her through. She came upon this one after a while, the one we will sing to send us out to the world to live our lives as Christians. Soon and very soon, we are gone to see the King. Soon and very soon, we are going to see the King. Soon and very soon, we are going to see the King. Hallelujah, hallelujah, we're going to see the King. The next verse goes, no more dying there, we are going to see the King. She was dying. And she had seen plenty of death in her life. Her parents, her mother died of cancer, one of the early people in her family. Both of her sisters had also died of cancer, 2 brother-in-laws. She had buried a child, her oldest son. She had buried her husband. And while she was battling cancer, her daughter came to be with her, went out for a run because she was the healthy one, fell on the side of the road, had a brain bleed, and that mother buried her too. There had been plenty of death that woman had seen. Soon and very soon, they are going to see the King. Soon and very soon, we are going to see the King. The woman looked at her mother and said, you like that one, don't you, Mom? The mother smiled, and my sister grinned back at her as my mom nodded and took her last breath.